All right, so every year the government drops its annual budget. And wow, it feels like trying to drink from a fire hose, right? But what if you had a decoder ring for it all? Well, that's exactly what we're going to build today. We're going to take this huge amount of official documents and turn it into a clear, understandable blueprint. Ready? Let's get into it.
And I'm not kidding when I say a mountain. This year's budget came with over 40 separate documents. Seriously, 40. It's just this massive data dump of policy papers, consultations, calls for evidence. And it's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed and just tune it all out. But here's the thing. All that jargon, it's not just noise. Hiding behind it all is basically the government's to-do list for the entire country, laid out for anyone to see if you know how to read it. And that's our job today. We're going to give you the framework, the structure you need to decode this massive blueprint for the year ahead.
So here's our game plan, our roadmap for today. First, we're going to learn the language, the different types of documents. Then we'll sort everything into 4 big themes: the economic engine, what's happening with the environment, changes to your own finances, and finally, how the government is looking to change itself.
Okay, first things first. Before we can really dig into what the government is planning, we have to understand how it talks about those plans. Because you know what? The type of document they publish tells you literally everything you need to know about how serious a proposal really is.
So the first term you absolutely need to know is policy paper. When you see this label, and you'll see it on the main Budget 2025 document itself, it means this is not a suggestion. It's not a maybe. It is a firm commitment. It's a done deal. This is the government saying this is what is going to happen. All right, so we've got the first piece of our decoder ring. We now know that a policy paper means business. So let's use that knowledge and start sorting through this blueprint to figure out what the biggest priorities really are.
And that brings us to our first major theme, the economic engine. A huge chunk of the budget documents, a really big part, is always focused right here. This is where we find all the clues about what the government is thinking when it comes to business, investment, and trying to spark entrepreneurship.
Just looking at some of the document titles here gives you a real flavor of what's on their mind. We've got things like a review of the digital services tax, a paper on non-compete clauses, but pay attention to those first two. A call for evidence on business rates, and another one on tax support for entrepreneurs. That phrase right there, call for evidence, that's our next big clue.
So what on earth is a call for evidence? Well, think of it this way. This is the government in listening mode. It signals a really early stage of making policy. They haven't decided anything yet. They're basically putting out the call to experts and the public asking, hey, what do you all know about this? What should we be thinking about?
Okay, so we can see the government is kind of in an exploratory phase on some key business issues. But hey, a strong economy is one thing. What does this budget blueprint tell us about its plans for the environment?
And that question brings us right to our second big theme, a greener future. This is where we start looking for all the documents that lay out the agenda on things like climate change, new energy, and conservation.
And the documents here are pretty revealing. You see, we've got a firm plan for green financing, but then notice this. We see a consultation on reforming landfill tax and another consultation on bringing in a new tax for electric vehicles. That word, consultation, that's the next piece of our puzzle.
And this brings us to our next document type, an open consultation. Now this tells us a policy is much more developed. The government has moved way past that initial listening stage. Now they have a specific proposal on the table, and they're asking, okay, we want to do this. What do you think of our plan?
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. A call for evidence is the government asking, so, what should we do here? It's basically a blank page. But an open consultation is them asking, is this the right way to do it? See the difference? They've already drafted the plan. Honestly, understanding this flow from one to the other is absolutely key to decoding what they're really planning.
Okay, so we've seen the government gathering evidence on the economy and consulting on green policy. But let's bring this back home. Let's get personal. Beyond all these big picture topics, how could this budget blueprint actually affect, your own wallet?
And that question takes us straight into our third theme, changes to your finances. Right, this is where we sift through all the documents to find the nitty-gritty details on personal tax, property, savings, and pensions.
And yeah, we find some very specific documents here that could definitely impact you directly.
For instance, there are changes to tax rates for property and savings, a proposal for a new council tax surcharge on high-value homes, and even a heads up about future changes to pensions. And the labels on these kinds of documents, they introduce our final key term.
And that term is a guidance document. Now, this isn't about debate or consultation at all. This is pure instruction. The decision's been made, the law is changing, and this document is basically the government's official manual telling you, okay, here is how you follow the new rules. It's practical, it's direct, and it's happening now. Okay, so we've got plans for the economy, the environment, and our personal finances. But to actually deliver on all of this, to make it all happen efficiently, you have to wonder, is the government also planning to change its own operations?
And that leads us right into our final section, reforming the government itself. This is where we look for clues about how the government sees its own performance, and, maybe more importantly, where it's trying to get better at managing its own money.
The documents in this bucket are pretty inward-looking, as you can see. We're seeing things like an evaluation of the Office for Value for Money and new frameworks for spending control and accountability. What this really shows is that the government is focused on making sure that taxpayer money, your money, is being spent as effectively as possible.
So there you have it. We went from a totally confusing, overwhelming list to a clear blueprint. Just by learning to tell the difference between a call for evidence, a consultation, a policy paper, and guidance, we can see the government's real priorities taking shape, right across the economy, the environment, our finances, and even its own internal reforms.
So the budget is no longer this impenetrable wall of text, right? It's a map. It shows you exactly where policy is already set in stone, where it's still up for debate, and where it's just a tiny seed of an idea. So the final question, that's for you. Now that you can read the blueprint, what does it tell you about the year ahead?